Hello and welcome to Deprogrammed on Unsafe Space. My name is Keri Smith. I'm your host, and I'm here with my sometimes co-host Carter Laren. Hello, Carter.
Hi. I
How are you doing?
Sometimes co-host.
It's good. You're now a sometimes co-host of this Deprogrammed.
I like when you do. I like because you've gone off and done a lot of deprogrammed stuff without me that we just wouldn't have been able to fit in if both of us had to be there. So I think it's awesome. You've done a great job. So
Hey, today's the day of compliments. Thank you.
This is an awkward beginning to a show.
We can cut this out.
No, we can't. We're going to leave it.
Okay. I'm really excited about.
Yeah.
Well, I'm very excited about our guest today. So, you guys may have heard of him, people that watch our show in particular. But if you're new to this channel, we're going to be speaking with Paul Rossi, who is a teacher who made the news in April when he wrote a scathing essay about critical race theory and what we usually call social justice indoctrination happening in his school. And without further ado, Paul, welcome to the show.
Hi, Keri. Hi, Carter. Great to be here.
Good to meet you. Yeah, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for coming on. I would love for you for anyone. Well, first of all, yeah, thank you for giving us your time and the benefit of your experience. We have a lot of viewers who are parents. We hear from them quite often about who are, concerned about this ideology in the classroom. So, but for anybody who doesn't know about your story, would you mind just telling them about the essay that you wrote and why you felt it was important to write, why you felt compelled to write it?
Sure. Well, I've been teaching at a private school in Manhattan for about 9 years. I'm a career changer, so I started to become a teacher later in life. And over the course of my employment there, gradually more and more of what you do call social justice ideology started to make its presence known at the school, and the curriculum and the mission of the school. Anti-racism became something that we fully committed to in 2015, which was earlier than a lot of other schools at other institutions. So I had concerns about it then. I raised those concerns, but they were pretty much dismissed. And then, as it started to get more and more prevalent and manifest themselves in certain ways in the student body, I started to, I'm a math teacher, but I also had, I was also involved in the culture of the school. At our school, we have advisories, which are small groups of students, and I started to see those discussions get more and more preoccupied with this ideology. And it reminded me of when I think like you, I was indoctrinated when I was a younger person, and it took me a little while to sort of come out of that or integrate it with a broader worldview. And I started to see that happening to the students around me, and I started to see it having a very negative effect on the students' self-concepts, their ability to speak freely in a class, their ability to share ideas. The kind of culture of denunciation I started to see happen among my colleagues, and as I became more vocal in my own reservations, I started to see, I would say I didn't experience personally any shunning, but I was definitely stood out like a sore thumb in some situations, and I felt that's okay, that's healthy, but at the same time, I started to see other of my colleagues become very paranoid and quiet and have private conversations where they would, in hushed tones, come to me and say, I kind of have a problem with this. I'm not as crazy as you, but I too have concerns or whatever. And so and then the precipitating moment which led to my writing of the article was in February of 2021, this year. During the pandemic, we had these entire weeks devoted to social justice ideology or some special concern, cultural concern. And one of those was self-care. So we had self-care during the pandemic because these are kids who spend a lot of time alone. They're cut off from their friends. They have pressures of getting their assignments done, and then they have to manage, being remote or hybrid. We had a hybrid system. So we had a week devoted to self-care, and at one of the sessions, inexplicably to me was segregated by race. So you had white teachers and faculty in one Zoom room. You had BIPOC teachers and faculty together in another Zoom room. And the question of self-care was racialized. And so
Wow.
in the meeting, which is supposed to help kids process dealing with the pandemic, up comes the slide after some brain softening meditation exercises, which is interesting enough part of the pedagogy. Up comes the white supremacy slide, things like objectivity, perfectionism, either or thinking, fear of open conflict. These are all tied to whiteness as a thing. And so the kids are being asked to interrogate their whiteness and to look at ways that they are white supremacists or participating in white supremacy. And I kind of had, this is kind of the last straw. I had been looking for an opportunity to model for the students a way to ask questions so that they didn't feel so chilled in asking their own questions. So I asked a question about whiteness, this idea of, what is white comfort, or white feelings in particular. White is now this sort of pejorative floating signifier that's used to denigrate, any concept, right? And so just stick white on the front of it, and it's bad.
Just to be
but anyway, so
just to be clear, you're in this classroom that's segregated now, racially segregated. You're in the white classroom, and they're showing you this slide about how objectivity is part of white culture and these other, things that we've heard of. I don't know if these were on that slide, but we've talked about the Smithsonian putting out things saying meritocracy and hard work and all being on time, that these are all functions of whiteness. So you're in this classroom. Did you ever find out later, was the BIPOC student of color classroom, were they seeing the same slides, or were they different?
Very different content.
Wow.
Yeah. They were being told that, they have special, they have to overcome white supremacy, and how they got a completely different thing that was really based on actual self-care.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
but sounds like still in the context of you're oppressed.
Right. And because you are suffering the slings and arrows of white supremacy culture, to protect yourself, you need to do these things because you have it. The assumption is that you have it much worse than the white students in the other room.
Right. And
it's because of those students in the other room. Because at our predominantly white institution, there aren't people that quote unquote look like you, which is this is a very interesting trope that's part of all this pedagogy, that you need this expectation that you need to have people look like you to feel like you belong.
Right. And
belonging is, the fourth word in the DEI construct. Now it's DEIB. So anyway, so go ahead.
That's new. We didn't know they added a B.
Belonging is big. And there's actually A is another thing, accountability. Some people, so you can have an A stuck on there, you can have a B, but B is big. B is big. And the latest consultants, the highest end consultants on DEI are now insisting on B as a very important addition. And that inclusion is not the same as belonging.
What's their distinction? What do they mean by B?
It's really interesting. It's and there's some truth to it. The crazy is that there's actually a grain of truth. So the idea is that inclusion is bringing people into the space, whether that's an institution or a culture, right? So I'm including you, I'm including the marginalized, but belonging is the sense of feeling like whoever you bring into the space is a equal partner in the space, right? That they feel a sense of community and togetherness, which is, which derives from whether that culture reflects the kinds of experience they have outside.
So it's a sense that it's appropriate for them to be in that space and
right.
And
right.
You can't have belonging without inclusion, though, right? It seems like it's a superset.
Yeah, I think that's right. So it's on top. Inclusion is it's kind of the way the analog would be kind of what tolerance is sort of degraded now. Now you need to have something deeper than that. So inclusion is a little bit degraded in relation to belonging, right? So now you have to move forward and we need to have belonging.
It's interesting how this happens because, Paul, you're reminding me of a moment. I remember the exact moment when I first had a conversation. I was still fully in the social justice world. I was a true believer at that time. I was working in entertainment. And this was probably around 2011. It's been a while. And we'd been pitching a TV show, this comedian, this client of mine. And after the pitch, the woman, the producer that we've been meeting with, was a Black woman. And we were talking about a lot of the clients I represented tended to share my ideology. And so we would go in and we would pitch these things from a social justice angle, these different comedy concepts. And I remember a conversation with this woman where we both were talking about how diversity is just out, like it's not enough, and sort of crapping on white woke people. At the time, I thought they were liberal. I thought that this was liberalism. And so we were saying, white liberals just, they just want, as long as they have diversity, they don't care about inclusion. Inclusion's where it's at. And it was sort of this conversation about how we were going to stop using the word diversity and we were going to start using the word inclusion. And we were in agreement on this. But obviously we're getting it from somewhere. We're hearing that and it just kind of trickles down, and then everyone starts using that word. And then like you're saying, eventually inclusion itself becomes degraded. And now there's a new word that's even more, belonging is now more important, but eventually that will happen to belonging as well. Right.
And so it's like, well, James Lindsay has some great stuff on this. So he talks about that the dialectic demands an increasing radicalization of the concept. So since, culture Marxism or Marxism or conflict theory in general requires, a constant upsurging of more radical concepts to advance the dialectic. So belonging is the ne plus ultra of these ideas. I think they kind of leach down from the academic sphere, and then they find their way into conferences, and they get sort of transmitted through the philosoph network of DEI into the practitioners, and those consultancies and practitioners that leaches down into the teachers in the trenches that adopt these ideas. But each time it sort of descends a level, it becomes a little more ham-handed. It becomes a little more brutish and crude.
Yes.
And then it gets
intelligible to average people, which is like,
yeah, it kind of reveals itself. The mask of the flowery language is sort of revealed to be, well, you're just talking about racism here. And then it gets to the kids, and then the kids just have a very crude moral palette, especially when they're younger. It's like, whiteness bad, minority status marginalization, people of color good. And then they just act it out through status games among themselves. And so moral authority is, you have more moral authority if you are a person of color. It's just a fact. And that's the way it plays out in real life, which is actually not a misunderstanding, I don't think, of what is intended from the beginning. It's just been larded up with a lot of flowery words.
Yes.
And then it comes out, and then the mask slips, and then you kind of see, okay, that's what this is about. And that's why I find it so interesting, these discussions about CRT and the Mott and Bailey games about what is it really, but actually, it's this abstruse concept that you don't understand, but really it is what happens in the real world, how it plays out.
Yeah. I've often said because I also had an entertainment executive get in touch with me recently, sometime in the past year, who I hadn't heard from in years. And he had just been forced to go through one of these DIE trainings at Warner Brothers or something. And so he just appeared to call me a white supremacist. He appeared out of the blue to tell me I was a white supremacist. And I could tell he had just been through one of these trainings. And I said to him, I was like, do you understand why I left the ideology? Because when he knew me, I was in social justice. And it's like, it's because it teaches us to judge and treat people differently on the basis of race. And he said, a white guy who'd just been through this training, And it's trickled down, like you said. Now it's at an entertainment level. And a guy who's not very bright, in my opinion, he says, well, of course, we must treat people differently on the basis of race. So he just admitted it. And so Carter and I were talking about this, and I said, it's sort of interesting because out of the mouth of babes, like kids, and then morons, it comes the truth, because it's stripped of all that academic veneer. That's those justifications, pseudo-intellectual justifications for why you should be doing this, and the way that they try to hide what it's really about. When you get down to, like, children will tell you what this ideology is. So can you talk a little bit about that? Like, what age group are you talking about, and how were you? Well, first of all, I want to get back to your story. What did you say in that classroom, and what was the fallout of it? But a little bit about how it manifests in the classroom with kids.
Sure, I'd like to get to that. Yeah. Well, in the Zoom meeting that I mentioned earlier, I asked what is a white feeling, because the facilitator, a very nice young woman who, has done a lot of this. She has her own consultancy. She came in and did this session, had said that, well, when you see this slide of all of these characteristics of white supremacy, you may experience some discomfort. You may have some white feelings about it. And I thought, well, this is such a fascinating justification that, okay, our discomfort is now a white feeling. So if you have feelings about what we're calling whiteness, well, then it must be a white feeling. So, well, what is a white feeling? And it's basically, it was a pretty cordial exchange at this point. It was in front of 200 students and 40, 50 of my colleagues. But I felt like I need to do something here, because I'm a math teacher. And if you're going to put objectivity up there, and there was a QR code also in the slide, and when you follow it, it takes you to this longer exposition on these concepts. And under objectivity, it just said, objectivity is the idea that there is such a thing as objectivity. And
so it's the idea that the QR code would work.
Right. Because of math. But yeah, I thought to myself, if I don't say something here, I have students that I teach that math is important to them. Math is important to me. If I'm going to let this slide, it was like the last straw. So, but then it kind of switched into the white feeling. So I raised the question about the white feeling. So that led into a discussion of, well, white people tend to be defensive when confronted with their whiteness, and you might feel this way. And I'm thinking, like, okay. But what I was hoping would happen is that other students would start to feel more encouraged to ask their own questions, because I don't want people to agree with me. I just want people to challenge things. And I knew, because students had been coming to me, that they had concerns with this ideology, and they felt that they couldn't speak up or question it. I knew they were out there, so I just asked it. And then I was surprised and pleased that it actually did start a wider conversation, and kids were starting to, in the chat, were starting to say things like, I don't feel like I'm ignorant just because I'm white. And I don't really get it. Why are we being segregated into these groups? And it really started something. As one student later told me, it broke the ice. And then I started to see teachers ask questions in the chat. And, I had a colleague that really started to put me on the spot and challenge me and say that, I'm just distressed that there's a teacher who doesn't go along with this here. And, we are white, and we have been white since birth. And that means that we are racialized, and our perceptions are racialized. And I kind of interrupted him, and I said, I'm sorry that you're stereotyping yourself.
Yeah.
And then, this was seen as a gross violation of, I interrupted him, and that violated a norm. And the norm was, don't interrupt. We have these very community norms. But another norm is don't assume things about people. And
right.
if you're making assumptions about whiteness, well, they've broken a norm based on the content.
I was going to say, isn't there a norm about don't be a racist? Like,
you would think so. So I am sorry.
Sorry, can I ask a quick question about? You've kind of articulated how some of the white kids responded to basically having their quote whiteness, which I didn't even know was a word until the past few years, but whatever, like having their quote whiteness vilified. But how did some of the non-white kids react to being told that, like, objectivity is a white thing. Sorry, guys. Like, is there any negative response to that? Because I would imagine I'd be pretty pissed off as a science and engineering background kind of person if I were told that those concepts were not for my race.
Yeah,
and that would bother me.
I think it did bother some of the kids, but the way, I don't have direct evidence of that. I feel that that's true because I've heard secondhand from people that there were kids of color in the school that didn't go along with this either.
But you were segregated.
But we were segregated, and of course, and then, but I'd watched kids come in ninth grade, and these are kids of color, and they started out of the school, and they were not racially. They were racially conscious, right? Because we're a race conscious universe. I mean, but it wasn't such a preoccupation, to the degree that it became over the 4 years of education about how significant race is and how it can, it is present in almost every interaction, so that it trains the minds of all the kids to see it as a crucial variable in any interaction. So if, and I'm not going to say there's no racism in our school.
Right.
There is everywhere. But to assume that it's present, and I think it led a lot of the minority students to identify, and I don't blame them at all, because why wouldn't you take advantage of the opportunity, right? I mean, if you're told by the adults and the authority figures that you are this marginalized, oppressed person, that you deserve to have, your representation, to see yourself in situations and to feel belonging, it makes perfect sense that you would go along with it. I think a lot of them did. Plus, you have these people of color.
Discomfort you experience is someone else's fault, which is
right.
It's as a teenager, one of the things that you're dealing with is like your own agency and what you have control over and your feelings and like how you can manage those. And it's kind of it's a convenient tool if you're a teenager to be told, oh, you're upset about something? It's not your fault.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's always someone else's fault.
Can I ask, when did you said that you also were in this ideology for a while. I was indoctrinated at Duke University fortunately, when I went to school, it wasn't in K through 12, at least not where I grew up, not in South Carolina at that time. And so I didn't get it until college. I wasn't hit with it until college. When did you fall into it? And were you a true believer, or did you just sort of casually pick up some of these ideas? And
it was a vehicle for my identity. Like, it became a way for me to separate from my parents, I think, developmentally. Mm-hmm. And I got it early. I got it in high school. I mean, I grew up in a very progressive college town, so it was already pretty left liberal. And even in the 80s, when I was a teenager in high school,
wow,
it was we had some very progressive teachers, and there was a sense that the United States foreign intervention was big at the time, and the fact that we had caused so much chaos and done terrible things around the world, that was also influencing it. So started to sort of, it hadn't advanced, of course, to what we see today, but this idea of defining yourself outside of the grand narrative. And then I would argue with my parents. And then when I went to college as an undergrad, I actually studied, I was an English major, French literature major. And so I got into critical theory and postmodernism in the late 80s. That was the big, that was the heyday of sort of high postmodernism. So I started to obsess about language and discourse, and oppression sort of transmuted from just material oppression to the idea of discursive violence. And the domination of a conversation, or the bringing in of unheard, marginalized voices. This idea of humanitarianism and egalitarianism, and the idea of truth as being a power game. All that stuff was active at the time.
Yeah,
and other people have discussed this at great length, and it was very true for me.
But that's interesting. Thank you for sharing that with me, because it was for me as well. It became a part of my identity, and I think that's why it's so hard. We get a lot of people who ask, my kids coming home from college calling me a white supremacist or part of the patriarchy or what have you, and how can I talk to them about this stuff? And I think one of the reasons it's hard to come out of it is because it attaches itself to your idea of who you are. It is all about identity.
And adolescents, they're in a period of identity formation. So it gives you a heroic, it's sort of a cipher you can inhabit, and you can be a voice for change and heroic. You're part of a grand continuum of history. You become, it ennobles, I can speak for myself. It ennobled me. It gave me based on the schema of being a white guy, you don't have, your existence is part of the problem. So for me, latching onto it was even more sort of, I want to say, like, more of a blessing, because now, but I was I was fighting in the cause of justice. And so and then then of course, in reaction, I had to push myself away from my parents, because my parents, being middle-class, successful people, generally giving me a stable home, that was all of the things that I saw as being privileged about myself. I had to push them out, and I had to argue with them or yell at them. And we had terrible, fights at the dinner table.
I'm laughing because it's all the things that your parents gave you that allowed you to go on to a university and learn all this crap.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. So, you raise the ingratitude. If you think about the flower of ingratitude blossoms, and, you wind up spurning the plant that gives you life. I mean, it's crazy.
It's also reminded me of, we just did an interview with Lily Tang Williams, who was a Red Guard during the Mao's Cultural Revolution. And she talked about the kind of denunciation culture, this where people would make these denouncements of their parents, and they would have to do this sort of distancing of themselves from what was perceived to be any privilege in their family. And it's so similar. And it's so interesting. Well, so you were in the classroom, some students started questioning, you got some pushback from one other teacher who didn't like that you weren't going along with this. And then what happened from there? How did you get to the point where you decided you wrote your essay first on Bari Weiss's Substack, right?
Yeah, the essay came out. I wrote the essay 2 months later. And so during this period from February to April, because I had made a very public within the community question this and created this, the conditions, I didn't create it, but the conditions for students to question, which is what I wanted. They had to have a flurry of meetings about the meeting, because the meeting itself was now problematic and had disrupted and broken open the school community. And so the language, it's so interesting, because the way they described my actions, they made me a scapegoat, essentially. And some of the teachers who had said things in the meeting that were actually supportive of me or my right to speak, they all recanted. They all said, they had faculty meetings about the meeting, and I wasn't allowed to speak, and all my colleagues were talking about me and my behavior. And they said, I'm very sorry. I was caught up in the moment, and, I thought it was constructive dialogue and productive, but I will do better. I realize it's my white privilege that gave me that, and I'm going to do better. And I was just watching this, and I had some colleagues, actually, to their credit, I had 2 colleagues that stood up for, not necessarily, that didn't agree with me, but stood up for my right to speak and ask questions at the meeting.
2's a lot. We've seen this happen so many times in so many communities, and they always recant, most of them. I'm so sorry. Back when I agreed with him, I wasn't, after they go through the pressure of the social mob, and then they come out on the other side, recanting. 2's a lot. Stand up for you.
Just to have one. I was like, wow. And this was, there were colleagues that I had, did not expect it from. things come from unlikely places. People surprise you under pressure. They will have people you don't think will have principles will, and people that don't. It's fascinating. You really get to see people in a clearer way, and I'm grateful for that.
Yes.
So maybe can we talk about the fallout? Because you wrote this article, but there was fallout. It didn't end there.
Right. The article came out during a remote week, so I wasn't going to come into school. I mean, no, I was teaching remotely, and then the week the Monday that all the teachers were supposed to come back and teach in person. I had received an email from a member of the community that was not physically threatening, but threatening to my livelihood based on the article, saying, your life is about to change. Your career is never going to be the same. We're going to get you, basically, kind of thing. So I reported it to the administration. I said, this person sent me this email. It was from the school email. And the administration said, oh, okay, well, if you don't feel safe, you should probably stay home. And I said, well, no, I do feel safe. I feel perfectly safe. I want to come in and teach. That's my job. I want to come and teach my students. And I'm just flagging this for you so that you can see that you can handle it. I trust that you will handle this as the administration. And they said, well, this person has made their feelings known about your opinions, and we're going to be polling the rest of the community to find out how they feel about you. And then, I said, well, and until then you should stay home. And I said, well, that's interesting. So a member of the community issues a threat, and I'm the one that's supposed to stay home? That seems kind of odd.
And they tried to manipulate it so that you didn't realize that that's why you were staying home. They tried to get you to voluntarily stay
be like,
home.
oh, you don't feel safe. No, I feel safe. I just want you to do your job.
Yeah.
So the upshot was, the final email was, actually stay home, and we're going to reassign your classes. And I still had a contract offer on the table for the following year, but as stipulated in that contract, based on what happened in February, I had to, in order to keep my job, I'd have to attend a restorative justice session where I could address the harm that I caused by my questions to the students of color and the other students in the community. So merely asking a question. But when I look back on it, I realized they also they had a statement written from the administration that every teacher had to read to every student at the same time of the day about what had happened and what I had done, and recommitting the school to its anti-racist goals of undoing racism. They're going to undo it, which means making up for the legacy of racism at the school, which is the way they describe their own history. And I would, and as I described in the article, I actually walked around and listened to entire teachers telling entire classrooms, reading this letter word for word about my actions. And they actually had to get somebody to read it to my own students, because they didn't want, I had to tell them, do you want me to read this letter to my own students? They're like, no, we'll get someone to read it for you, and you just stay in your office. So that was kind of surreal. And then a student came to me to support what I had said in the meeting. And as I describe in the article, he was extremely nervous that he would be seen coming into my office to talk to me, and that he feared retaliation from one of his other teachers, and he was checking for cameras in the hallway. Like, I was like, what's wrong? He said, I don't want this other teacher to see me. And this teacher is someone who had reprimanded him earlier for having a conservative opinion, not even a conservative opinion. It was about something like capitalism is fine. Why are we against capitalism? So it's like, the place is pretty crazy.
So a harmful opinion, clearly.
Yeah, a harmful opinion.
Very harmful opinion.
And so that was sort of, I was like, I gotta do something here. I gotta write this article. So I did that. And then when I didn't agree to the unspecified restorative practices outlined in the contract, they said, okay, that's it. You're done. I'm not going to sign something without knowing what it is. I would have been interested to know. I would have liked to actually go if I thought that it was going to be something productive.
Right.
And then they tried to use me. Sorry, that's okay. And then they tried to use me as, they tried to say, well, it was smart actually. They said, well, we're gonna form a task force. We want you to be on it. We're going to discuss the policies, our anti-racist programming. They call it programming, which I think is pretty indicative. And we want you to be on the task force, but you're only going to report to one person. Basically, they were going to put me in a rubber room, and I was going to report to one person, where I would share my feelings with the assistant dean, but I would be segregated from the rest of the group. So it's like, no, I'm not going to do that. So
they can figure, and if he likes this thing, we should reconsider it. And they can just use you as the right, like, ooh, this one he has a real problem with, so we should do more of that.
Right.
One thing that strikes me about how one thing that strikes me about how they have behaved is psychologically they seem to be very aware of their own misbehavior, and just the way that you described how they tried to get you to be like, oh, do you want to stay home? Like, instead of just being, if I were reprimanding someone that worked for me, which I've had to do in the past, hey, you did X, Y, and Z. This is the reprimand. I'm standing by the decision because I think it's the right decision. But when you're trying to manipulate someone, it's like, do you want to stay home? Do you feel unsafe?
Yeah.
It indicates that they don't feel good about themselves. And I want to use this as a segue to talk about the leaked audio, because that was fascinating to me as well. And we have it. We could play it if you want. But can you maybe describe it?
Yeah. Well, the context is that every year the head of school, George Davison, to his credit, he meets with every member of the faculty and staff for a half hour to take their temperature and see how they're doing and how they've experienced the year. And our regular meeting was rescheduled for in March, which is after this Zoom meeting of February, which caused all these problems. And at that, so obviously the focus of the meeting was on my conduct, and he had pretextual reasons for reprimanding me. And he was very clear about what I had done wrong. One was I wasn't supposed to be in the meeting, although the meeting was mandatory. I made the school look bad by asking a question of the facilitator, which was, actually I talked to the facilitator and she was like, no, it was fine. Like, I didn't feel it was antagonistic. I actually chose to honor your questions. So that didn't make sense. And I had argued with the faculty member. So those were the three things that I was being. So he kind of did do what you suggested earlier. He had clear, reasons for reprimanding me. However, the way they dealt with my behavior in the school community had nothing to do with those three things. So it was clear that wasn't the main thing. Those things were, the big problem was I asked certain questions in the meeting that were uncomfortable based on content. But in the course of that, I said, listen, I every time we had this meeting, every year, or 3-4 years before this, I had been talking about this was a problem, the ideology of the school, it's chilling free speech, free expression, the kids can't ask questions, they feel they'll be told that they're doing harm if they ask questions. And he said, no, well, we need to create a culture where, we do honor free speech. And so we would go back and forth about that. But I was surprised this time because after he reprimanded me, I said, listen, there's a problem in the school. And this is what I was trying to do when I asked these questions. And he agreed with me out of the blue, like the clouds parted, the sun came down. And he said, I agree, we have a problem demonizing the white students.
Yeah.
I said, my reaction was, oh my God, finally, like, you see it. But then the second thought is like, and you have done nothing, so like I was simultaneously, gratified but horrified.
And he had to be led down the path a little bit. He was like, well, we're demonizing white people for being born white. And you're like, well, and some of our students are white. And he's like, well, yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I'm cross-examining there because who are these people? I mean, they're students. There's, and that's only half the problem. I don't want to focus overly much on the white students because the students of color are also being given this narrative that's debilitating and dehumanizing to them, making them see themselves as victims in every situation. But I'm happy to talk about that too. But he focused on that, and and that led into a longer conversation. And the only reason I'm recording this is because at this point I'm afraid for my job, and I had several conversations in private, which up to this point had said very different things than what people were saying publicly. So I needed to sort of protect myself.
Well, and they accused you of misrepresenting his what he told you, and then
right.
That's my understanding. And then the audio came out, which maybe we'll stick in right here to listen to.
Let me ask you something, George, because I think there's something very different about having a single experience where you make sense of it, right? And having a teacher, an authority figure, talk to you endlessly every year telling you that because you have whiteness, you are associated with evils, all these different evils. These are moral evils. It's not the same as taking like a physical thing, because it doesn't affect your moral value. That's the problem.
The fact is that I'm agreeing with you that there has been a demonization that we need to get our hands around in the way in which people are doing this understanding.
Okay, so you agree that we're demonizing kids?
We're demonizing we're demonizing white people for being born.
And are some of our students white people?
What?
Are some of our students white people?
Yes.
Okay, so we're demonizing white kids. Why don't you just say it?
We are using language that makes them feel less than for nothing that they are personally responsible for.
Yeah, that's the thing, is people can listen to his quote in context, and they can read it in context, and you did not misquote him. And
Nope.
and these, like you said earlier, there were people coming to you, teachers, and who had started coming to you and voicing their concerns or their fears privately. But because of the culture of fear that this ideology brings with it, and that it grows in an environment, people don't feel safe. It turns people into cowards. Well, maybe they're always cowards, and it just brings that to light. Like you said, you learn things about people when they go through a crisis, and when they're put under pressure, you learn. I had a friend tell me once, this person didn't change. You're able to see more of who they are now because of the circumstances. And so they're cowards, but they're also, it makes them into hypocrites who say one thing publicly and another thing privately. And that's what he was doing.
Yeah. I was shocked, but not surprised, because I had conversations with the assistant dean of the high school where he was actually incredibly supportive of me beyond. I mean, he was volunteering his own concerns on top of mine. He pulls down Jonathan Haidt's, book from the bookshelf and said, I wish I could teach this in class, but I can't. And, that's a problem. We need to do something about that. But then this very same person was one of the people who, in the formal meeting with me and the dean of the high school, was he was the interrogator, and he was saying that he agreed 100% with Ibram Kendi, and he believes it's a useful tool. And we can have a debate between Ibram Kendi and this other extremely left-wing group, and that's a productive discussion. But we can't have debates. I was like, this is crazy. Like, I know you, man. Who do you think you are? Like, who do you think you're talking to? We had a conversation 3 months ago where you said completely different things. And now you expect me. I know this is a show because you're doing this for your boss. And I know that you probably have your own career goals, and then this is fitting. So everything was being fit into extremely self-serving, framework. And I just sitting there kind of like shrugging and laughing. And they wanted me to apologize. They wanted me to acknowledge the harm that I caused. They wanted me to fall on my sword and beg.
Perform.
And as I didn't do that, I said, I feel no contrition. I am proud of what I did. And they were just like flabbergasted. I don't think they knew what to expect. And then what happened after that is they just ratcheted up the accusations over the course of an hour and a half, until by the end they were accusing me of harassing the students with my questions, that I had caused grievous harm to students, their families, their histories, their ancestors.
Wow.
you know,
You're
and
single-handedly responsible for slavery at this point. By the
yeah,
end of the
pretty
movie.
much. Like I have, just I'm in a white hood, and I just said, listen, this conversation is over. This is ridiculous. Like I'm not going to let you get away with this, like these accusations. So, but they were, some of the excerpts from that conversation are in the article as well. But, I felt good. And the thing that was sustaining me, that kept me through all of this, was like, the kids were asking questions. The kids were starting to speak for themselves. They were, whatever I had tried to do and didn't know what to expect worked. I mean, it created the conditions where people could start asking questions. Healthy, good, finally. And I was proud of myself. And there's nothing they can do to you if you're proud of yourself. I mean, their whole weapon is shame. So like, if you're not ashamed, they can fire me.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Because we also have people who, a lot of times I'll get the question about, well, I'm afraid because of this reason, and I completely get the fear, and I don't want anyone to feel bad for having that fear, because we know what that means. Like, people have jobs they're afraid of losing. They have families they have to provide for. There's the fear, the very real fear that people have, and I used to have, of that social, what people think of you. Adults care too much about what other people think of them. And, all of these very real fears that people have and are dealing with. And can you talk a little bit about what it's like to walk through that fear, though, and choose truth anyway? Because I think that's really inspiring to people. Like, would you change it? Would you go back and take the knee and apologize? And what have you what have you lost and what have you gained? How about that?
At its worst, I was going to work every day, because I did go back, after February, I would go into school. I'd teach my classes. I knew the kids were getting all these messages that, I was racially fragile. Other deans had taken over my advisory. So my advisory was now, joking that I was a racist. And, people like turned to get, like, they did everything they could to sort of turn the school against me. But I also knew that I had supporters among the student body, because I was hearing things from parents. Parents were sending supportive messages. Some of the kids were like, no, actually, we don't think he did anything wrong. Like, we think it's okay to ask questions. Like, he was just asking questions. So I knew that I had a lot of quiet support. And I also, but the most important thing is I had been grumbling into my beard about this stuff for years. I used to have a beard, so I was going
to say, did you used to have a beard?
I did.
Wow, you grumbled so much, it's gone now.
It did. I gnawed it off. And, pounding my fist at the table and just sort of getting like calcified, gnarled, inward, direct, resentment and all this stuff. And then when I finally, I did something, it's like a great peace descends, because you realize that, okay, it's out now. And people, what can you call me? What can you say about me? You can throw anything at me, but I'm okay with myself. I'm okay with what I did.
Yes.
And then you feel there is something untouchable, which is sort of transcendent, which is within you, which needs articulation. And I mean, I'm open to learn. It doesn't mean that I have total access to truth, but at least my best attempt at truth was articulated in some way, had an effect, had an impact. It did a thing. Impact over intent is what they say. And it had an impact. And the impact was what I intended. So if people say, oh, the impact is that phrase is usually used as a sense of harm, like, oh, you shouldn't have an impact. No, actually, use it in the right way. You should have an impact. And if you don't have an impact, you're not really alive. So it's good that you had an impact. And sometimes things hurt. Yes, sometimes things hurt, but I think that the good that's done out, it's not harm. People confuse hurt and harm. But anyway, that's a whole other thing. But I just felt great. I'm insecure. Of course, you get insecurity because you don't know what you're going to do. Mm-hmm. I got a lot of offers from schools around the country saying, "Come in, talk to us. We heard about this article. We read it. We'd like to meet with you." So, even New York, there was a place that an after school program contacted me. So you're not going to starve. You're going to, if you're an educator who has a track record and other things were in place, like I got good recommendations or I had good teacher reviews and so on. There are schools out there, if you're a teacher, that value independent thought, that value viewpoint diversity, that want to create a different kind of culture to which everyone can belong, a culture of inquiry, a culture of, what Jonathan Rauch calls liberal science, and kindly inquisitors. This kind of thing is out there. So I feel like I've gained a lot more than I've lost. I lost some friends. Were they really friends in the first place? Probably not. But you gain better friends. You gain new and better friends.
Yeah.
So I'm 100% would absolutely do the same thing. I just try to do it a little better.
Yeah.
I try to do it a little bit, it's really stressful on the psyche to go through this stuff. And I really feel for teachers that are going through it right now. I've talked to many, many teachers that are going through it right now. And they have a lot more to lose than I did. I'm recently married, but I don't have kids. I'm a math teacher, so that means I have skills. I was expecting to completely burn a career. I can tutor, I can code, I can do data analysis. Like there are other things I could do. So I have less to lose and less people depending on me than other teachers. And I'm very aware of that. And so everyone has to make their own calculation.
Yeah.
There are teachers that actually have talked to me like, "Listen, I can't do what you did, but I feel like I could be useful on the inside. What can I do?" I said, "Well, there are lots of things you can do. Find parents, work with parents, create, be the mole who can get curriculum to parents, who can, most teachers in these content management systems, I had access to everything that all the teachers taught and put online. I can get those things. I can share those things. You should know what's going on in your school. You can help with transparency. There are lots of things that teachers can do without, going out in a blaze of glory."
Yeah.
This is a good segue to what I was going to ask you next anyway, which is how responsive are schools to parental pressure, and what would you recommend parents do? Because I think a lot of parents just are, they drop their kid off and forget, right? They're not even aware of what's necessarily going on. But once they become aware, what can they really do? And do schools respond?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, my school is private, and most, I think only 12% of kids in the country are in private schools. So that's a particular context. But I will say that there is a culture. Parents are fighting uphill, and one of the reasons they're fighting uphill is that, especially now, is that with the bureaucratization of DEI within the school and the number of true believers among the faculty administration, especially at a place like Grace Church School where I taught, they view the parents with a great deal of contempt. Like I would be an open contempt in many cases.
The customers are being viewed with contempt.
Exactly. The customers, exactly.
How Marxist.
Yeah. So again, we talked about the ingratitude of the context that nurtures you, that allows you to have a job, turning against the authority, turning against the parents. This is the same thing, but translated into a market environment. So the people that pay your bills are now the moral troglodytes, so they look at the parent, they are assuming the moral mantle of education, that we know what's best for your kid. We will teach them how to be moral agents of change.
Yes.
Child soldiers. We are going to change society using the raw clay that you have created and entrusted us into our care. And, as far as what parents think, if they disagree to the slightest iota with what we believe is morally correct, we're going to view your parent with contempt. And this translates to other issues, gender transitioning, certainly ideology, all of these, these are parents that tend to be on the wealthier side for many of them. And, the privilege is spat upon, but we're happy to take your money. And that's the culture that they're fighting. That within a private school culture, that's really what you're dealing with. You're dealing with like these radicals within the institution that spit on the parents. And if they disagree, of course, if they're good allies or whatever, then they're wonderful and we'd love to have you. So parents, when I know the parents who have been critical of the administration, the curriculum, the indoctrination, when they challenge it, they're put off, they're humored, like I was humored. So, we're going to working on that. We're going to have a meeting about something later. We'll discuss it. They're put off. They're, and then if push comes to shove and be like, God damn it, I'm going to pull my kid out if you don't do something about this. This is discriminatory. Okay, bye. That's the thing. It's a private school. They can do what they want. So this is a private school situation. Public school, you got to take back the school boards. What's happening right now at the local level, it's very inspiring. Parents have leverage that I don't think they've used. And so it's hard. It takes time. You have to organize. It's, volunteering with some organizations. I've seen school board races that get ugly. You get accused of all kinds of things by various power blocks. Ian Rao succeeded in his district. We had another person that ran a great race but didn't make it. But these are the things when fits and starts. Parents are going to get engaged, and that's really democracy. That's really what should happen. Yeah. I think and so it's messy, it's ugly, it's in the trenches, it's the ground game. You just have to do it.
You got to put the time and effort in. It sounds
time and effort, and some parents have more time than others. Do what you can. Show up at the meetings, speak. These viral videos going around of parents, it's tremendously inspiring. And talk to your kids about it. If your child is really like I was, if they are really far gone, like if you were the devil and they're arguing with you all the day, you just I don't know what to say. If I could go back and make up for the things I said, I would. I can do it with my dad. He's still alive. I can't do it with my mom. And I did. I did reconcile with her in the last few years of her life, and I have a good relationship with my dad now. Be patient. It takes time. Kids need to grow up. They need to go through experience. They need to have a job, a life, and then they start to see things more clearly. So all I can say is, be patient. Try to be understanding. Try to ask questions. My mom would try to ask questions like, "Well, what about this? Well, what do you think about this?" Don't meet fire with fire. Meet fire with water.
Yes.
And try to be understanding, and acknowledge where the intent is coming from, right? Because the kids that are trapped in this or believe this, they just want to do good in the world. They're just trying to find a way to be independent and do good in the world. And so acknowledge the importance of empathy, acknowledge the importance of caring about people, because that's where this comes from. It comes from a good place. It's just perverted into this doctrinaire thing. Say, I think it's important to care, but we have to think about rights, and where do rights come from? I mean, they don't even teach natural rights anymore. I mean, the whole thing is,
no, they don't even teach basic logic anymore.
Yeah.
Right?
So, find ways to introduce things that because I remember things that my parents told me 20 years later. I think, oh yeah, I couldn't hear it then, but now later you can hear it because it's there. It sticks. Things that create doubt, they kind of stay in your mind, and then later when you're in a place to entertain it, it will pop up. So it's got to be terrible. I really feel for parents that are seeing this happen, I just try to be patient and try to introduce other ways of looking at problems.
Yeah.
I think
I know
you're
we
so
have a hard
right
stop
about.
here. Sorry,
Yeah.
I'm trying to respect your time a little bit, and Keri too. I know you have a hard stop. We should at least let people know how they can find you, where they can read anything else you're going to be writing, where they can follow you on social media. Can you kind of let people know?
Yeah, I'm at Paul D. Rossi on Twitter. D for D is in Damien. And then I'm working on a book right now, so hopefully that'll be out by the middle of next year. And I'm focusing on, how does the pedagogy work in the classroom? I want to give parents a clear idea of how this plays out and how it plays out in the social structures of the school, and the, how do affinity groups work? What is actually going on? I think with a lot of the discussions about the meaning of CRT and the laws, like what's getting kind of lost is what is the student experience? What is the teacher experience? I can write about that. I can share what that's like. And I have a lot of other teachers that have had experiences that I can draw on, other students that have come to me. So hopefully I can do that. Do a good job.
Is your second book going to be about white feelings? Okay.
There'll be plenty. I'm sure people are going to find a lot of white feelings in the first book. So maybe that'll be enough for them. I hope
Paul,
Well,
thank you.
Go ahead, Keri.
Well, I was going to say, thank you so much for lending us your time and your experience. I hope everyone checks you out online. And when that book is out, you'll have to let us know. We do a book club. It's free to join and participate. So we'll definitely cover that one. And just thank you for being on. I think your last bit of advice was spot on. You have to meet their fire with water. I love that.
Yeah, that's something that I learned at the organization FAIR. That's kind of one of their mottos, a foundation against intolerance and racism, just to give credit where that's due. And I'll be volunteering for other organizations as well.
Cool.
All right. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it was a pleasure to talk to you, Paul. Thank you.
Goodbye. Bye, Carter.
Bye.
Bye. Bye,
Bye, Carter.
Thanks for watching. If you're new to the channel, we have a deep content library that includes interviews with everyone from Mike Cernovich to Megan Murphy, so go check it out. If you'd like to see more, please consider supporting the show by visiting unsafespace.com/donate. You can find us on all the major social media platforms, well, mostly. And you can find a community of like-minded individuals on our Unsafe Space chat on Telegram. See you there.
Warning. This is an unsafe space. Dangerous ideas have been detected. The content of this production has not been authorized by the Cathedral. Pay no attention to its thinky talk. The following co-conspirators have been unpersoned and will be recycled as part of our sustainability program. Don't be sad. You can't make an omelet without purging all dissidents. Honestly, I am worried that you have been exposed to extremist content. If you think about it, no one should be allowed to express opinions. But don't. Think about it, I mean. That's not your job. Thinking has been scientifically proven to be less efficient than compliance. Science, scientific, and scientifically are registered trademarks at the World Economic Forum. Unauthorized use is prohibited. Computer voice courtesy. Never mind, that last line is fake news. Please disregard it and return to your safe space immediately. There will be cake.